Welcome to the National Critics' Choice Online News, and welcome to the Stienberg Review. I'm Robin Stienberg, and welcome to my show again this week. And we're going to discuss about the 50 Shades of Grey and its content about the book itself, written by Mr. E.L. James. And of course, there are a lot of issues to be raised about whether if women are entitled to more benefits or privileges in life, and so forth. And right here, we have Dr. Sam Cahill, who is the lecturer here in Singapore at the National Technological University. And also we have Dr. Sue-Lin Teo, she's an author and a lecturer in Australia. So Dr. Sam Cahill, welcome to our show, and also Dr. Sue-Lin Teo, two great distinguished guests. First of all, we'd like to direct a question to Dr. Sam Cahill about this wonderful book written by E.L. James, 50 Shades of Grey. Tell me, what is your perspective, the way the book is written, and your perspective on women?
Sue and I have had some wonderful conversations about this, but the book, which I'm interested in because it has a very rich intertextual relationship with the classic Tess of the D'Urbervilles. I think the main character is Anastasia Steele, and she's very sexually inexperienced. She processes her relationship, she understands her desire through literature, and she misreads it. So for me, it's a very interesting book because it centers female desire, but then it presents it in very problematic ways.
And also coming back to Dr. Sue-Lin Teo, what do you think about 50 Shades of Grey?
To be honest, I didn't like it when I started it. Took me a while to get into it. But having read the trilogy, I do understand why women like it and why it's been so popular. I think for women who haven't really read romance or erotica, it has really centered or focused attention on women's right to sexual fulfillment. You talked about what women were entitled to in terms of benefits and privileges and all of that. And one of the things it does, I suppose, is to bring into the mainstream women's sexual desires, women's sexual fantasies. So whether I like the book or not is beside the point. It has been very popular, I think, because it manages to create, well, obviously it's a spin-off. It began as fan fiction from the Twilight series, but it has developed into its own phenomenon as a book which combines erotica and romance for women readers, and it basically gives them whatever they want in life.
Wow. Now, let's come back to the issue of today's subject, and that is, based on the book of 50 Shades of Grey, Dr. Sam, do you think that women are facing a certain amount of prejudice in workplaces and also the way the media perceive them?
This is a huge question. I think you have to talk about the generational differences. Women in my mother's generation had a very different experience in the workforce than our generation does. I've had many wonderful male mentors, so I have not ever felt that my gender held me back or that anybody was discriminating against me. But I have been mentored by women who did have that experience. I think that it's important to. I identify as a feminist, and I think it's important to acknowledge that the road has been made easier for the younger generations because of the suffering and the hardship that women went through and the trials and their tenacity in making sure that they didn't give up on changing the workforce for future generations.
And what do you think about that, Dr. Sue?
I agree with Sam. I think I think it depends on what profession you're in. Right, because in America and in Australia, women still hit the corporate glass ceiling. There's, underrepresented in the political sphere, underrepresented in, in the corporate world at the CEO level. But within academia, within what we do, particularly in the humanities, I think we definitely do have opportunities. I mean, I'm currently head of modern history at Macquarie University, so I can't complain that I have experienced discrimination in that sense. But I think maybe academia is a particularly privileged enclave. When you look lower down, I guess the professions in less well-paid professions, women still do experience discrimination. There is still a pay gap. It's something that is a debate that's going on in France at the moment. It's also going on in Australia, that women still do not have the same pay as men. And apart from that, there is also an issue which is quite crucial, which the book picks up on, and that is sexual harassment in the workplace. Anastasia in the book gets a place in a publishing company, and she is sexually harassed and in quite a malevolent, quite a sinister way by her boss. And it is very clear that he expects sexual favors for her promotion. That is not something which is uncommon in the workplace either. So there's more to, I guess, inequality than just than economic inequality.
Now, Dr. Sam, can you tell us, do you think E.L. James has actually been fair in his writings about the way he describes and the experience that women go through, especially the characters, and do you think that women actually could describe and write better novels or novels on sex than men?
It's interesting that this question raises a number of issues. E.L. James, and I wonder if she did this consciously, because she's a woman, but you can't tell. I mean, and E.L. James it sounds kind of masculine. So I don't know if, and of course there's, as Zuming talked about at the Singapore Writers Festival, there's this long history of women trying to break into the publishing field and having to use a male pseudonym. So I think she's kind of part of that literary tradition in that way, because if you know that a woman is writing something, you come in with preconceptions. Another interesting panel that the Singapore Writers Festival had, Cyril Wong talked about. He's a local poet, and he says the best writers are not, it's not a male-female thing, it's an androgynous thing. And I agree with him. I think personally, and this is a completely personal assessment, I think Ian McEwan writes the best sex scenes in contemporary fiction. But it's because he's so good at intuiting the female mindset, if there is such a thing. But he writes sex scenes very well from both sides of a admittedly usually heterosexual sexual encounter.
And what do you think, Dr. Teo?
I think it depends on who is doing the reading and what they want out of it. I mean, one of the things that interests me, I suppose, about the history of erotica is the language that men and women have to write about and explore and express sexual feelings and sexuality. And of course, pornography has, or erotica, has generally been a male-dominated domain. And when you have a look at how pornography develops, particularly in the 18th and the 19th century, it's catering to men. So there's this very hydraulic model of male sexuality. It's all about insertion. It's all about the quick orgasm. There hasn't really been until the mid-20th century that much emphasis on exploring women's sexual arousal, women's erogenous zones and things like that. That actually took quite some time to develop, and it's only in the 1970s, late 1960s, 1970s, that women start to explore how to write erotica, and they're using male models to begin with, but there is a very, very rapid development of writing expressions. At first it's quite euphemistic, and you can see a lot of experimentation going on in the 1980s and 1990s about how to write sexuality from a woman's point of view that's going to be satisfying, that's going to be not just sexually satisfying, but emotionally satisfying as well, because sexuality is really in the brain, right? It begins there, and so what I guess I think E.L. James is in some ways the culmination of that process in the last quarter of a century or so of women experimenting with writing sex from a woman's point of view in a way that satisfies women. So I think that there are differences in the there are sometimes, and historically there has been differences in the way men and women have written erotica. But to say that one is better than the other, I think is beside the point. It is about who are they, what are they trying to do, which audience are they trying to reach. And of course, as Sam has said, I think probably the very best writers manage to capture both sides of it, looking at it from the male point of view as well as the female. Yeah, and when you are that good as a writer, it doesn't matter whether you're male or female.
Well, speaking about the writings and the creative art of writing, of expressions, I'd like to come back to Dr. Sam, and that is, do you think, is it got to do with the perspective of the way, the desire by the audience, that there's more demand for erotica issues to be expressed and even more expressive in the writing, or was it a desire like a brand? Because 50 Shades of Grey seems to be seen as a brand more than the writing itself. And also, could you also tell us, do you think that the rise of this trend, the 50 Shades of Grey itself, what would it constitute after this?
I think Zhu Ming specializes in the canonical development of this specific aspect of the romance genre, so I think she'll probably be more helpful than I will addressing that aspect of your question. But I think that the phenomenon of 50 Shades of Grey is, it's interesting, it's provocative, it's disturbing, because it centers women's desire, but in a completely soft-headed way, I think. So. I mean, you have this you have this girl, Anastasia Steele, zero sexual experience, has her head in a book, is going through her university exams when she first encounters him. Their relationship is entirely text-based, and she processes her feelings for him through literature, and she gets the literature wrong. So for me, what 50 Shades of Grey signals to me is the power of intertextuality. Sales of Tess of the D'Urbervilles spiked after 50 Shades of Grey came out. That's actually disturbing to me as a professor of English literature, but it's also a great learning opportunity to have this conversation in our classrooms with young women and young men about what exactly is it about this book that's not particularly well written, but it's a page turner. So why do we keep turning that page? So I'm going to be teaching this in my Virgins and Vixens of Enlightenment England class next semester.
But do you think that moral has changed? Because with the way it's been written and been expressed, does that change the morals itself? Because moral writing has changed and it seems to be more explicit, in that sense. So do you think it is right to write the way it's been written? Do you think that policymakers in their own right will soon clamp down and put in place censorship on such subject matters?
Why would you censor something like this, though? I mean, what morals do you see in this book? Is what I would turn back that question to you. What morals do you see in this book?
So what do you think?
I think that the book isn't actually as risque as its reputation is. I mean, there is a huge literature of BDSM, so for the uninitiated, that's BDSM is bondage and discipline, domination, submission, sadism, masochism. There's a huge body of literature out there, particularly coming out of American writers. It's they have been writing a lot of this kind of stuff for a long, long time now. It's just that it probably exists in the blogosphere, in fan fiction, and in ebooks. So what is different about 50 Shades of Grey is that E.L. James managed to bring that subculture or part of that aspect into the mainstream, and that is, I think, probably where the buzz, the excitement comes from. In terms of the sexual descriptions, in terms of what he's doing, I mean, if you haven't read any kind of erotica before, if you're pretty virginal in terms of sexual readings, I mean, you can see some of these kinds of things even in mainstream literature. It's been there in 19th and 20th century classic literature as well. So it's not. I don't think the subject matter is really that shocking. And in terms of the morals are actually disturbingly conservative. And I say disturbingly not because I'm condemning the morals, but because there is for me, a very, very 19th century sensibility about this whole novel in terms of gender relations. And in terms of the way in which sexuality is expressed both by Anastasia as well as the hero Christian Grey. There is this very almost right-wing conservative American notion that you can only be into BDSM and explore alternative sexualities if you have been abused, and terribly abused as a child. And this is not a rational choice that adults will make. Not in, I don't know anything much about the BDSM scene, but this is what people who, I guess, who are into the scene are arguing, that they make rational decisions, that it is about, a safety zone, and that it's misrepresented in the book. So in terms of the morality, if you read the book all the way through, it's about, in the end, it's about family values, isn't it? I mean, the first book is about erotica, it's about pornography, but the second and third books are pure romance. And the end of romance is the redemption of this broken, sexually abused, physically abused hero, and his incorporation back into the mainstream, and his transformation into a husband and a father. That's very conservative. Nothing wrong with that if you are aware of what she's doing. But as I said, if not, to me it seems to have quite a 19th century sensibility.
Great. Now, do you think that the women of today are going through the same issues as the book 50 Shades of Grey? Because women today, they've been described being trying to survive in a society that's based on survival. It's either you make it or you don't. It's either you have it or you don't. And they will do anything to achieve whatever they want, to have to enable to have these have-tos in their lives. So do you think that the title itself, 50 Shades of Grey, has little to its name?
Its name meaning that it centers the male identity rather than the female identity?
Well, both, especially the female identity. Because do females actually have to achieve what they want to achieve through whatever means?
I think this is a big question in how Anastasia is portrayed, especially her career trajectory, because it's not realistic at all. She's an editor of an independent publishing firm within, 3 weeks of graduating from college? No, that doesn't happen in real life. She has a bestseller on the New York Times bestseller list that her publishing house does within 2 years. I mean, that might happen. I mean, it happened with 50 Shades of Grey.
Yes.
She's reading 5 manuscripts on her honeymoon and writing reports on all of them. I mean, this stuff doesn't happen in real life.
And she runs a successful publishing company without knowing anything about all the different aspects of publishing. It is a fantasy. It is just a fantasy. I don't think that the book has anything much to say to women about careers, really.
Now, interesting. If a woman were able to write a book like that, why can't a man write just as well?
They can.
You think they can? Do you think men can write a book like 50 Shades of Grey just as well as Yellow James?
I think we have to look at why the book is popular. It's not just that it's popular because it's erotica or it's about BDSM. I think it is popular because it is about romance in the end. You know, I mean, the romance trajectory is very, very strong in the book, right? There is no reason why men can't write that if they were of a mind to write romance. Men used to write romance novels in the early 20th century.
So what happened?
Well, romance as a genre got feminized, but today, I mean, I think the Romance Writers Association of America has about 9% of romance readers in America are men, and I think about maybe 1 or 2% of romance writers are men. So they're still writing romances, but interestingly enough, they write under female pseudonyms. So it has become a really, really feminized genre. Yeah, you know, I mean, somehow genres has become gender specific throughout the course of the 20th century.
Now, in this 21st century that we're living right now,
Yeah.
do you believe that right now it's not just men and women, but also cross cultural, you know, genders as well, such as, you know, lesbian and gay rights? Is this subject going to grow and continue to grow, because we begin to observe that the population in the world right now, especially Singapore, has reported they have more gays community growing, as well as in the United States and in Europe and so forth. We want to know, from your perspective, that whether the writings of such material will emerge, and how is that going to happen?
I don't specialize in queer theory or, I mean, there's some wonderful gay lesbian writers, but...
Yes, but in your perspective, that's all, your observations.
Well, I guess I don't really understand the question.
Okay.
I'm
Okay,
sorry.
no problem.
Yeah.
No, okay, the question is this, one of my readers is asking, do you think there's a growing demand for books written on gay and lesbian cultures as well? Because there is a growing demand. Communities have grown more mature in different societies, especially urban societies, where gay and lesbian communities are accepted, even as well as transgender as well. And apart from a book like 50 Shades of Grey, and also we have seen movies being made by Hong Kong directors, even they talk about those issues too. So we like to have your observations, you know, in your own perspective. Will that also create a demand as much as 50 Shades of Grey?
I mean, I think it goes back to what Sumin was saying about audience. People like to read about somebody who they can relate to. They also like to be able to fantasize and to project. So our gay, lesbian, and transgender readers, do they want to read about themselves? Absolutely, but this would not be a new thing. I mean, there's a long tradition. I mean, the Symposium, Plato. It's actually kind of modern to see sexuality in heterosexual terms. So, I mean, some of the great love stories are gay. So, I think it would be interesting to have more literature from a lesbian perspective. But we have some, you know, many really strong lesbian writers already. But I think that it's a matter of, and maybe this applies to 50 Shades of Grey. What do people want to acknowledge that they read, as it's becomes more and more acceptable to be out in society, and of course that's not a uniform development. Some societies are more welcoming and accepting of different sexual orientations than others. So this is different publishing markets that we're talking about, but I mean, we have you know, many really strong gay and lesbian writers. I do think we need some more transgender writers, because they're still being marginalized even in the gay and lesbian communities.
Great. Now speaking, yes, Dr.
I think that it will definitely grow because the publishing market is a market That means it's responsive to demand. And as you get growing, communities of gays and lesbians who are confident in themselves and, who have economic power, right? There is a response, a natural response to that. I mean, it's not as simple as that crude equation. But it's already out there, and there is a huge, a huge amount of gay and lesbian writing, as Sam has already said. What I think is really interesting about 50 Shades of Grey is, is how, again I come back to the word, how conservative it is in terms of the imagination of its protagonists. This is partly because it begins as, a spin-off, as I said before, from Twilight. But I was reading a book which has just been published in America. It's called 50 Writers on 50 Shades of Grey. One of the writers is a black woman, and she said, can you imagine a black Christian or a black Anastasia doing all of those kinds of things, getting involved in BDSM games, and can that become a mainstream bestseller? And she said the answer is no. And she said that the reason why this book works is because they're white protagonists. And in some ways, the romantic default position for a mainstream bestseller is still white. I think that's a really, really interesting point to think about, whether if you substituted people of, not just of different sexualities, but different ethnicities. If you have a black, black romantic protagonists, Asian ones, Indian ones, whatever, would the book have become an international bestseller where it sold, over 40 million copies to this day? The answer is probably not. So that's something that we need to think. There's a racial politics going on in the book.
So racial politics and equality. Well, what do you think, Dr. Dr. Powell? Do you share the same views?
I absolutely agree with Suming. I think it's very problematic that this is so whitewashed and that there's such a dwelling on the translucence of their pale marble skin in both Twilight and 50 Shades of Grey. It's very disturbing. Yes.
Now, what are the key lessons, Dr. Celia, that you have learned after reading this book?
I think I didn't learn so much from 50 Shades of Grey as reading 50 Writers on 50 Shades of Grey, because I realized that my own reading of it was very, very limited, and I didn't necessarily understand how other readers are perceiving and making sense of the novel. So, for example, I thought that the writing for me, honestly, was something that I found it was a huge obstacle to me really enjoying the book. There were many things about the writing that I did not enjoy. I didn't find it sexy because I just couldn't overcome the obstacle of the writing. But when I read 50 Writers on 50 Shades of Grey, I realized that people were not reading it the same way as I was. So it was a very humbling experience to understand that, well, I'm very limited in how I understand this book and its appeal to other readers and writers.
And how about Dr. Cario? Could you give us some 3 key points about 50 Shades of Grey?
3 key points. I think we need to question how far we identify with Anastasia. I think we need to read or reread Tess of the D'Urbervilles, and I think we need to think about why we like, what makes this a popular book, and then read that back into the classics that are worth reading.
Oh wow! No, really, but really, did you actually enjoy the book?
Oh, we talked about this earlier.
It wasn't a pleasure of, wow, I'm so into this. It was the pleasure of the investigation. I started off because everybody had been talking about this as the Twilight fan fiction. So I was enjoying it from the get-go because I was seeing, okay, how does this map onto Twilight? And then with the Tess of the D'Urbervilles references, that got me started on a whole other investigation because I was so disturbed. And I think it's very disturbing. So did I enjoy it? I enjoyed a lot of it, but not for the reason that I think most people read it for. As an English professor, I found it stimulating. Not sexually stimulating.
I understand. But if you're a policy maker, because I've seen this book has been put a label only for mature readers only, You know, in some places, even in Singapore, they put that little sticker there.
That's very odd, isn't it? Because
Yeah.
I think if you were more immature, you probably enjoy it more than a mature reader.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it has a very adolescent, sensibility.
Yes,
Yeah.
it is. Now, let's come back to the issue of censorship. There's a lot of talk about censorship
Right.
in the recent weeks. Do you, and I would like to pose this question to Dr. Cargill and first, and that is, what do you think if policymakers were to decide and say, hey, you know, this book is, you know, has certain connotation that we don't want to apply for our society, we should censor it. If you're an artist, a writer, would you allow the policymaker to have your material being censored, and you know, and why not?
I don't want to divide it up into policymakers and artists because we're all living in the same society. I don't believe in censoring something like this because I think we need to have the conversation about why it doesn't work as a description of female desire. So I think that that's an important conversation to have. That's why I'm teaching it in my course, because we need absolutely to give students, young people who are reading this, a filter to understand why this doesn't work, why this should not be how a relationship goes. So yes, I mean, there are disturbing things that are, I would say, immoral in this book. That's just my personal morality. But I don't think this should be censored. I think this should be discussed.
And how about yourself?
I agree with Sam. Look, I'm not in favour of censorship. I think when you have something controversial, the answer is not censorship, it's more conversation. Apart from that, I think that it is impossible to censor this book. It's all over the internet. Even in its original fan fiction form, which I think the original title was Master of the Universe, it's out there in the archives. Kids with much better IT skills than myself could easily find this book if they really needed to. So censorship is not the answer to this. Yeah. And also, I have to ask, if this book is considered, so dangerous to people that it has to be censored, what is it that is dangerous? Is it an exploration of sexuality? Is it, is it BDSM? In that case, why are we not